Hey there, everyone.
Hey there, folks.
This is Amanda.
And this is Rita.
And you're listening to I Don't Know Her, the podcast where we talk about women you've probably never heard of.
But you should have.
And now you will.
Yes.
So it is post-holidays.
It's over.
We both had, probably pretty emotional, hard. I think holidays are hard, personally.
They are. They've probably since the age of 9 stopped being fun for me.
See, I loved Christmas until I came out.
Really?
Yep. So it was like I was a full adult before things started to get really hard for me at Christmas. And ever since then, it's kind of been terrible. The only Christmases that were like less fraught have been in recent years when it's just been Abby and I. But even those are always a little bit emotional for me because those are the ones where I haven't been in my mom's life anymore and she's not in mine.
Yeah. Did you come out around the holidays?
Kind of. So I'm let's talk about my coming out story. So basically what had happened was I was fairly sure, like I went through the I think I'm bi and I think I'm this and eventually I was just like, I think I'm just gay.
Yeah.
And that happened actually when I decided to officially come out because I thought I would just kill myself instead.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was really bad. I was like, I think that's what I should do. And
that breaks my heart.
Weirdly enough, that was stopped because at the time I was living on, I was teaching on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation and I only had one friend there and he was the cousin of a guy I knew. Mm-hmm. And so we had things in common and we'd kind of hang out. And
nice.
One day I showed up to work. He had the classroom across from me and I showed up to work and we found out that he died by suicide.
Oh no.
And it was literally when I was making my plans and writing my stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is devastating.
Yeah. Complete loss.
And then, so then I went back into the closet, kind of retreated. And then that spring, this guy that I had been friends with literally since the day we were born less than 24 hours apart. Our mom shared a hospital room. They're just pumping that shit out in the hotel room. In a hospital room. The week after Mother's Day, he was found in his apartment. He lived alone. There's still not entirely clear if it was an accident or not. Mm-hmm. But I went home for his funeral, and when I saw him, we were 24. We were both 24 when I saw him in his coffin. Because I never do viewings, but
yeah.
The girl I had been in love with in middle school and who was my best friend was there with me. We were really good friends with him. And she made me come up there and look with her. And it was very traumatic.
Yeah.
But it was actually it was the moment I just said, holy shit, I can't do this.
Yeah.
I can't lie anymore. I can't be in the closet anymore. But I couldn't tell my mom yet. So I went home and that was in May. And so I made the decision, told my husband at the time, I was married. And then I left because I had a summer job in the woods hanging out with teenagers.
Jeez.
And my training was in Pittsburgh.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yep. So that June, I walked into a bar and had a good time, and in walked another lesbian. And I saw her and I went, oh, she's good looking. And I was like all keyed
Was
up
it like
for a
West Side
one-night
Story?
stand.
Everything got blurry. It was just the two of you in the room.
That's right. Actually, it kind of was.
That's
like she
sweet.
walked in the door and it was like in the movies when it was just like a zoom and everything else went quiet and blurred and I just saw her. And I was just like really into having a one-night stand.
Aren't we all?
I was like, this is going to be it. I'm going to have this awesome one-night stand. It's going to be fucking great. And then she like kissed me on the cheek and went home that night. I was like, what just happened? I swear to God, we were going to fuck. And we kept in touch via letters, and the rest is history.
So the coming out after, so was that before that Christmas of that year? Okay.
So I had still not told my mom.
Oof.
By this point, Abby had moved to Montana. Or actually, the first time she came to visit in Montana was in September.
Oh, wow.
And she actually flew into Spokane. And so I came here and picked her up. And I was still living in Montana at the time. Took her back to Montana. And it was while we were driving, after we'd gone out to dinner, we were driving back to the apartment we had already signed a lease on together.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we were those people. And my mom called and I was being pretty cagey. And I had already told her that my husband and I had split up.
Okay.
And she wanted to know more and I just said I'm not going to talk about why. And on that phone call when I was driving home, she was like, it's because you're gay, isn't it?
Whoa. And you were like...
And I just like didn't say anything. And she was like, and she's in the car with you, isn't she? And I was like, are you watching me?
I would be checking my skin for GPS trackers. What the fuck?
So, like she just like kind of stopped talking to me and I didn't think I was going to go home for the holidays. But then my mom told me to come home and she said, you can come home as long as you come home alone. And so
already there.
Yeah.
Creating that fracture.
So we came, so Abby actually came home with me because she was supposed to get a train out of Wolf Point, which was the closest like town-ish thing to my tiny little town. And she was supposed to take this train to Chicago and then had a friend in Chicago who was going to drive her to Pittsburgh. And we get to the train station and the train never showed up.
Oh.
And so I called my aunt who we had stayed with the night before because my mom didn't want me to be with this woman. So she was like, my mom called me on the way back from the train and she was like, we've got supper going. What time do you think you're going to be here? And I said, well, her train never showed up, so we're not going to be there. We're going to go to my friend's house or to my aunt's house.
Yeah, because you've drawn the line in the sand.
Yeah, you said that this is where... And she was like, no, you can come here. I was like, are you sure? She was like, yeah, you can come here. And that night was very awkward and strange.
Yeah.
And unsettling, I would say. And then the next day, I took Abby over to North Dakota, where she boarded a very expensive tiny little plane and left. And then I had to go back alone. And you could tell that night when Abby was there that she was trying.
Yeah.
But once Abby wasn't there, she was not trying. And she was fucking pissed. She was the angriest I think I'd ever seen her. My stepdad wouldn't even look at me, wouldn't speak to me. My mom was treating me like I had murdered someone.
Jeez.
I actually developed a yeast infection from the stress that was so bad I ended up in the ER on Christmas Eve.
This is terrible.
And it was just got worse from there. At one point, my mom cornered me and made to have a talk and proceeded to
try to talk the gay out of you or what?
Yeah, and was talking shit about Abby.
Oh, no.
Did she even get a college degree? I was like, yeah, but why would that matter? It was just so weird.
Just trying to find anything.
Yeah.
Anything to tear it apart.
It was, and like that whole Christmas was just horrendous. And on top of it, like Abby's at this point, like the only person I can really talk to. And she just was unavailable like the entire time. I couldn't get her on the phone. And if we were on the phone conversation would maybe last 10 minutes before somebody would be like, Abby, come here. And I was like, holy shit, I am having a complete and fucking meltdown, breakdown, and I have nothing. And yeah, it was really, really,
that would
really
mar
bad.
your holidays.
And
Definitely.
so after that, Abby was like, I'm never going to leave you alone on Christmas. And I was like, thank God, because that was the worst experience of my life. And then the next Christmas, she left.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was real bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that one I was just fucking angry about. because she'd made this promise to me and I felt like,
You said you would,
And it's like, and that was like one of those things where that kind of opened up one of our wounds. We were talking about wounds before.
Yeah.
We started recording and how like certain things just stick. Yeah, stay as a wound. And that was one of them for me, was that, she said she'd be there and then she wasn't. And she, to her credit, tried very hard to make herself more emotionally available when she was physically unavailable. But I was so fucking mad.
I would be too.
And I couldn't really get over the anger and the hurt for a long time. It was a long time after that. And that just, like Christmas forever after that kind of had that feeling to it of like betrayal and abandonment and
well, mine kind of is surrounding outside forces that I had no control over because I was a child. And I come from a very big family. My dad is one of 11. My mother's one of 11. So I have 20 aunts and uncles. My mom's mother, my grandma, her birthday is Christmas Day. So we would always do Christmas Eve with my dad's family. And, my dad's family used to own a restaurant. My grandparents did. So I've grown up in the restaurant industry. It's been part of my entire life. We used to have this big giant party. My grandma had 30-something grandchildren, and she'd always have a little something for you, a little bag of like Hershey Kisses with oranges and like walnuts and like a little toy, and had your name on it, and just grandma made you feel special, that she was thinking of you. And then we would do tamales, we would do midnight mass because we're Catholics, and of course church at midnight is kind of fun because you're already like full. Mom and dad are kind of drunk and they turn the lights down real low. It's kind of neat. And then we come home, we'd open our presents, Christmas Day, go to my other grandma and grandpa's house, big giant party, more tamales. My grandma used to make the best mole. It was so good. And it was always centered around that. It was family and a big celebration. And I can't remember quite what age I was, but my dad had a falling out with his family.
Oh.
And it centered around, my dad used to play music with his sister, two of his brother-in-laws, and then a friend. And they did kind of Christian-based music. They used to travel. They would go all over the place and tour with this band. It was really popular in our town. Everybody knew who this band was, and music was very much the center of our lives. Well, a fraction happened in the band. And my dad decided to leave because it was the best and healthiest option for him. And he needed to get out of what I later learned was a toxic situation, which, things have mended slowly now. But back then it was like we broke up with our family, and I didn't know why. And I remember just not understanding, like, why can't we go to their house anymore? Or why are we distancing ourselves? Why are we pulling away? And I was so angry at my father. I just thought it was his fault. And I thought, why is he doing this to us? Why is he doing this to me? And it just changed those Christmas holidays to we were maybe not celebrating with them for a few years. And then once we started coming back and celebrating them with them, it felt like we were like the others.
Oh, you were the outsiders.
Yeah, just because they had continued to grow together And then we came back into the picture and there was resentment and there was hard feelings. And it just never was the same.
Mm.
And then on my mom's side, we didn't spend a whole lot of time with that side of the family, not as much as we did with my father's side. So that was the others too. It just felt like sitting on the outside of things. Not saying it still wasn't, enjoyable, but I felt like I had lost my cousins and my aunts and uncles. And so since then, later on, like in high school and stuff, we just started doing Christmases like on our own.
Yeah.
And that was tough because when you're raised, being around 80 people for the holidays down to just your one unit, it's a lot to take away.
So how do you feel about it? Obviously this year you were just your family unit.
That was a bummer.
Yeah.
Because we turned it into, I go to my mom and dad's. We would do the whole tamales, Christmas cookie thing. My mom is the same way as my grandma. Grandma always has a little bit of something for everybody. Snacks galore. Like, you'll never starve in my mother's house. Like, there's always something that she's throwing out. I'm just going to make a little something. And there's a huge spread. It's like, it's not a little something. So she always does a good job at that. So not being able to go home, that sucked. Because it's just another loss. You're losing something.
Yeah. I think 2020 is just the year of loss.
Yeah.
So it feels like, you know. I think I know a lot of people who have lost someone.
Yes.
Lost career opportunities, lost money, lost connections.
Lost friends.
Yep.
Family.
I mean, it's been a rough year. It is now officially 2021. So hopefully we can start to repair and mend some of those losses and move forward.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, holidays I think are one of those things where you either love them or they're a burden.
Yeah.
I don't think there are a lot of people that are very much in between that.
Sometimes I felt like it was a burden, especially like when I was a teenager, because of there was a lot of pressure, because my older siblings would come home, they'd have a new girlfriend or something like that. And my sister, had a new boyfriend, or her and her boyfriend were fighting, and maybe he's not going to come to dinner, like a little bit of drama there. And then hurry up, we're going to be late for church. And so you're all trying to get ready in the same, we had a house with one bathroom.
Oh my God.
Trying to get ready for church. And then it just felt like a little pushy at times, which makes you not want to enjoy it. I felt like this year I really didn't want to try. And then I realized I've got a little one that really needs a Christmas.
Yep.
So
especially this year.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, I handmade garland.
Oh.
Yeah. I strung up the Christmas cards. We cooked together. We decorated the tree together, did the stockings, made sure, things looked festive, let him help in the decorating and stuff. So he was very happy about that. I got to remember to I know it might not be that important to me anymore, but I got this little Christmas mouse over here that needed it,
Honestly, what's funny about what we're just talking about is I thought, this is interesting because the thing I'm going to be talking about today revolves a lot around home, a sense of place.
Okay.
Food, family. And so I think actually it's a good connection. Interesting. Yeah. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Do you know who Edna Lewis is?
I don't know her.
Good. She's the first lady of Southern cooking and the true pioneer of the farm-to-table movement.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So did the hipsters didn't invent it?
They did not.
Oh.
Actually, there's a female chef in California named Alice Waters, who is the one who's really been credited with being the sort of like one to really popularize it. But I would argue it was Edna Lewis.
Alrighty.
This is my specific personal argument. All right. Food historians may disagree with me, but I think I'm right. So Edna Lewis was born on April 13th, 1916.
Okay.
In Freetown, Virginia. She was one of 8 children in her family. Freetown actually wasn't a town despite its name. It was a settlement, basically. It was a community that was founded by her grandfather.
Oh.
His name was Chester Lewis, and he, along with a couple of other people, founded this little community. And all of them were formerly enslaved people who, upon emancipation, were given a little plot of land by their former enslaver.
Mm-hmm. So, like, here's this land, be happy.
Mm-hmm. And they were like, cool, we will.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they set out to do, was to create a community that was self-reliant. And they did so by farming. And Freetown was it was literally a farming community. Like, that was what they had been doing. And so when they got this plot of land, the first thing they planted was orchards.
Mm.
Everybody who worked or who lived there worked the land and in some way used the land to feed each other, house each other, that kind of thing. Miss Lewis remembered it as a place in which people gave and gave back. If someone borrowed a cup of sugar, they would return two. If someone fell ill, the neighbors would go in and milk the cows, feed the chickens, clean the house, cook the food, and come and sit with whoever was sick.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is, I think, very, very important to the telling of Edna Lewis's story to get across how vital the community of Freetown was in the formation of her identity and of her later success as a chef. So there is a 2006 documentary, 22 minutes, it's pretty short, documentary that was made about her. And when I first initially watched it, there's like parts that are Edna Lewis's words, and I thought it was her reading them. And I didn't realize until the end, when I was reading the credits, that it's a narrator. Like, it's somebody reading her words, but not actually her.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind when you're listening to it, because the way that the movie is made really, I think, implies that it's her voice, and it's not her voice. So this is some words that she wrote in one of her cookbooks. And I just think this is important to illustrate what it was like to be in Freetown.
We lived in the country. So the first thing women would do, they would go out in the early mornings and cut the greens or the cabbages and pick the beans that had dew on them. And then they would bring them into the house. We had to participate in all the farm work, feed the chickens, pull the roots from the garden. When the corn was ripe, we had to harvest it. My first memory of who I was, it was food. I didn't cook, but I lived among a group of women who were all good cooks. Because a man was taught if he didn't choose a woman who was a good cook, he was embarrassed. No one taught me to cook. I just saw it at Aunt Jenny's up the path and in my mother's kitchen. Mama Daisy, I called her. In summer, she made perfect sweet potato pies in an old wood stove in our outdoor kitchen. In winter, she made ash cakes, fresh ground cornmeal baked in the ashes on an open hearth. Cooking was simply a part of my life.
And is that her?
That is her. She's goddamn gorgeous.
Oh, it seems so lovely.
Do you see what I mean, though, about the connection between the land and the food?
It's very deep and almost spiritual in a way.
I was going to say the same thing. There's like a spirituality to it. I also find it really interesting that she talks about how she never was technically taught how to cook. She just learned by watching.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you, but that's how I also learned to cook.
Yeah. I remember hanging out in the kitchen and just watching the technique and stuff, or can you do this really quick for me? And so kind of like watching my mom how to do it and doing it the same way.
Yeah, I always told my mom that I didn't want to cook and I didn't want to learn how to cook. And part of that was like, my weird idea of feminism. Was like, yeah, I don't want to be self-reliant. So dumb. But I really did have this idea that I didn't want to learn how to cook. And when I finally was actually cooking on my own, I knew a lot about it. Mm-hmm. I knew a lot about how to do things because I just sat and observed for so long that by the time it was in my hands, I did know what to do, even though I hadn't technically been taught.
That's neat.
And I found that to be so similar to what Edna Lewis talks about in that clip. So her young life in Freetown was obviously marked by this very strong sense of community, but also quite a bit of tragedy as well. Two of her siblings, so I said earlier that she was a child of 8.
Yeah.
So actually there were supposed to be 10.
Oh.
There were 2 that were stillborn. And then 2 of her siblings died later of pneumonia. So there were only 6 of them who survived.
Oh, wow.
And both her father and her grandfather, who founded Freetown, died before she reached 13.
Oh, wow. That's really young.
Yeah, it is really young. And again, she's born in 1916. So by the time it's 1929, that's when her family has basically fallen apart. And 1929 is the year of the great stock market crash.
Yeah.
So they're headlong into the depression at the same time that they lose all of the men who make the money.
Gosh, that's devastating.
So her mother there was no way her mother was going to be able to support all of those kids without any help. And Edna Lewis decided that she didn't want to be a burden on her mother. And so at the age of 15, she left the farm. And she initially landed in Washington, D.C.
Oh, that's a very different place.
It is quite different. Yeah, she went from like a really rural, small farming community to the capital of the country.
Yeah, that's yikes. I bet that was shocking.
Yeah, I imagine that it was a pretty big adjustment for her. There's not a whole lot of information that I could find about that specific time in her life. She doesn't write a lot about it. She doesn't talk a lot about it. The few things that I could really pick up is that I know that she was relatively active politically. She worked on President Franklin D. Roosevelt's second presidential campaign.
Wow.
And she also, at that time, would volunteer and go back down to the South and watch the polls to make sure they weren't discriminating against Black voters, which they obviously did anyway. Again, this is the 20s.
Yeah.
And the early 30s. She also met and married a man named Stephen Kingston. He had been a merchant marine. He was a cook in the merchant marines, and he had been retired at this point. And he was very heavily involved in the Communist Party. So she herself actually became communist as well. And that makes sense to me because communism was like the only political movement that was talking about how to take care of those who were less fortunate in a true socialist way. So at some point, her and her husband moved to New York City to start a new life. So talk about like a big change.
Jeez, yeah. New York is even more shocking.
Huge, huge, huge change. Her first job in New York City was working at this Brooklyn laundry. Her entire job was ironing. She had never ironed before in her entire life.
Oh my gosh.
So within 3 hours, she was fired.
Oh, I was going to say, I wonder how that interview went.
It didn't go well. It didn't go well at all. She did sew very well, though. She had learned to sew very well. So what she started to do was copy Dior designs and make dresses for people.
Oh, nice.
And in fact, do you know who the photographer Richard Avedon is? Mm-mm. I know him by name, basically, not like a huge knowledge of it, but he was a pretty famous photographer at the time, very sought after, and she made clothes for his wife.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, at some point, she made a dress for Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, shit.
So she could have been talked about, like we could have been doing a whole thing on her fashion design, but that's not what happened. But she also started at this point to make her own clothing. So you'll notice in that clip, do you see what she's wearing?
Yeah.
Can you describe that for our audience?
Well, it's kind of a loose-fitting purple dress with like some white striped details. Looks very comfortable and kind of a little bit more modern. Like you could probably get away with wearing that now. Like the scoop neck on the collarbone.
Do you notice anything about the design or anything it reminds you of?
It looks like rows of something.
Yeah, so what she had started to do was make African-inspired clothes.
Oh, okay.
And that's how she dressed for basically the rest of her life. So she started making these clothes in the like 20s, 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And that was well before the like Black Panther movement and the, you know, African identity movement. And so she was designing and making her own African-inspired clothes well before, like she's a trendsetter in so many ways. And so that's what she looks like. That's what she wears. That's not always what she wore. There is a photo of her in this documentary from when she was like moving to DC when she was a young woman. Mm-hmm. And she's wearing like, you know, the clothes that were typical of the time that were mainstream, right? Like a little blazer suit jacket type thing and a skirt. And now she wears at like even by the 30s is wearing these like flowy garments with lots of big loud colors and designs. She had the like, I don't know what that garment is called. It's kind of like a drape that you put over like a shoulder. You know what I'm talking about?
Like a shawl or?
No, it's almost like a sari, but it's not a sari. I don't know what the actual term is for it, but so she would wear that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And it was very different from what anybody else was wearing. Yeah. So it kind of set her apart. She was also really heavily involved in the Communist Party. So not only was she actually a communist, she actually was like big in the party. Mm-hmm. And she actually worked for the Daily Worker, which was a communist newspaper at the time. And she had lots of friends in the communist like circle. And they were all like, everybody, it reminded her, I think, a lot of Freetown in that way that like everybody was always there for each other, cooking for each other, giving things to each other, housing people if they needed housing. So I think that sense of community was what she really found with her fellow communists. And one of the things that she did is she would host a lot of dinners. And she would cook these big elaborate meals for everybody. And a lot of it was techniques and food that she had learned growing up. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's some tricky stuff we're going to end up getting into about what the difference between Southern cooking and soul food is. Mm-hmm. Because in our modern lingo, we kind of link the two together as the same thing.
Yeah.
And in some ways they are. But whenever you go to an establishment called soul food, there's some things we expect. What do you expect when you go to eat in a so-called soul food restaurant?
Oh, soul food. Oh, gosh. I'm not quite sure.
Collard greens.
Well, I was going to say greens, probably.
Some fried chicken.
Some ham. Mm-hmm. Some ham hock.
Ribs, maybe.
Yeah. I want to say okra, but I feel like that's more Southern cooking.
That is, yeah. And again, they're obviously very linked, and there's a reason for that. Mac and cheese.
Yeah.
So I would say that Edna, Miss Lewis, was very much of a different style than we now would think of quote unquote Southern food or soul food. And part of that is because of the commodification of Southern food, the fast foodness of what has happened. You know, things like fucking KFC. Yeah. Which has taken these traditional dishes and sort of bastardized them.
Oh, yeah. It's like what Taco Bell has done for Mexican food. People think lettuce and sour cream and tomatoes is what it's about.
Sidebar, do you know the real story behind Taco Bell?
I do.
It's fucking shitty. You share.
The idea was stolen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This man literally copied a family's restaurant and pulled it out from underneath them.
Yeah, there was a Mexican woman who had started a little taco joint and she couldn't get white people to eat her tacos. So she started making this American taco. Mm-hmm. And the guy across the street was like, that's a great idea. I think I'll do that.
Yeah.
It's fucking shit.
And then he made Taco Bell.
And in some ways, that's kind of what happened to the Southern food, soul food situation. So in preparation for this episode, I want to make a couple of things clear. One is I'm not Black, and so a lot of the things I'm talking about, I'm trying to tread some very careful, careful places so that I don't overstep. But also as a foodie and somebody whose family grew up in the South, like my family is Southern, so I have a lot of connection to the idea of this food, and it is the food I grew up eating. So there are a lot of connections there, and I understand a lot of it. It's also important to note that, one of the reasons why soul food became popular is because of the Great Migration, which is what happened after slavery ended and Jim Crow laws were put in place, and it was horrific and terrible. So a lot of people from the South moved to the North. A lot of Black folks did, and there just wasn't the access to the kinds of foods that were homegrown in the South.
Yeah.
So they had to substitute with things in New York and Chicago and Detroit and all of these other places. And so that's kind of another reason why the Southern food that Edna Lewis makes and talks about is not the same in some ways. It is in others. But her soul food, her Southern cooking is very slow. It is not like, hey, we're gonna, throw together this little meal, and like you couldn't do Edna's food in
an afternoon,
in a fast way.
Yeah.
And it is intentionally meant to be slow food. Like it is for enjoyment. So because she's doing all of these big meals, and she also was making these dresses and working kind of in the fashion industry, she starts to meld the two together. Her Communist Party friends and her fashion friends, who sometimes kind of overlapped anyway, because her artistic bohemian fashion people were often also like kind of, gonna have, different ideas.
Yeah.
And it was through these meals, though, that she ended up finding what would be her true calling. Two of her really good friends and who were regular guests at her table were a man named Carl Bissinger, who had previously worked as a window dresser for Lord & Taylor, like making the window displays. Yeah. And his partner, John Nicholson, who was an antique dealer. They proposed turning this little spot they'd found into a small cafe. They wanted it to be like a French-style cafe with pastries and coffee. But Miss Lewis was like, you should have a restaurant. You're going to make more money. It'll be great. And John said, well, the only way I'm going to start a restaurant is if you come be my chef.
Oh, wow.
And so she agreed, but they actually did it as a partnership. She wasn't just a hire. She was a part owner of the cafe.
Nice. Yeah.
So in 1948, she becomes a professional Black woman chef who is 50-50 owner in a cafe.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a fucking pretty big deal.
That's a big deal. Yeah.
Because at this point, as we all know, the world is still segregated.
Yes.
Like when she was making dresses, sometimes she had to go in the fucking back door of the like boutiques that she was bringing them to because they wouldn't let her come through the front. She made the goddamn garment. So like this is a big deal. It really is a big deal. It cannot be overstated. So she designed the menu. It was a very simple menu. There was a roast chicken, a filet mignon, and there was always a fish dish. And it never changed. That was the menu. It was a whole ass menu.
Wow.
There was like, desserts and some appetizers or whatever.
Well.
But those were the 3 entrees and that was it. So Lewis's cooking is what made these very simple dishes into these coveted reservations. And the cafe immediately became a huge success and the home to all of the who's who in New York City and anybody who was visiting New York City. And here are just a sampling of the people who were regulars at Cafe Nicholson to eat Edna Lewis's cooking. Marlon Brando, Salvador Dali, Tennessee Williams, Greta Garbo, Howard Hughes, Marlene Dietrich.
Holy crap.
And Truman Capote.
Those are some people I might know.
I might have
heard of them.
There's even there's a photo of Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis having a meal together.
That's really cool.
So in fact, the Cafe Nicholson was pretty tiny. It didn't seat very many people, and it was like I looked at some of the photos of the interior. Had these like giant palm fronds in them. It was very elaborately decorated.
Yeah,
which I'm sure was the two gay men who who also owned the joint, which they skirted around revealing that they were gay on this documentary that was made in 2006.
Really?
But I was like positive. I took one look at the one guy, John Nicholson, when he was younger, and I was like, that's a gay man. That's a gay man right there.
Were they partners?
Oh yeah, they were romantic partners. And the only reason I found that out is because I found the obituary in the New York Times for Nicholson, and it said in there, or maybe it was Bissinger, I can't remember which one, and it said in there that their romantic partner had died a couple years earlier or whatever, and I was like, I knew it! So anyway, they were a gay couple. It's no secret now, okay? Everybody, we're cool with gay people. And that's and that was another thing I found really interesting about Edna, that Miss Lewis was friends with gay men, white gay men, like from the start.
Yeah.
And in fact, you know who she absolutely adored? Little Truman Capote. He would like she talked about him coming into the restaurant in a pair of pumps.
Oh my goodness.
New black pumps. And he was like, what do you think? She's like, they're adorable. She thought he was just the little cutest. Because he was also really small. He was like literally little.
I want to be a fly on the wall in this place.
Right?
Yeah. It just seems like an area, a safe place for experience and conversation, and somewhere where you could probably feel like you were somewhere else and you could get away and you could be yourself.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, it was a really big draw for Southern transplants like Truman Capote, like William Faulkner, like Tennessee Williams. Mm-hmm. Those were all people who had grown up in the South. And she said that Truman Capote would stick his head in the kitchen. You got any biscuits for me? So she was actually hailed as a brilliant chef, which was just being a head chef was a big deal, and being very good at it was a big deal. And she had this chocolate souffle that she made, which is a French dish. Mm-hmm. She would make this chocolate souffle that she actually learned how to make from watching her mother. And when the New York Herald Tribune reviewed the restaurant, the food critic said the souffle was, quote, light as a dandelion seed in a wind. And one night, William Faulkner came to the restaurant for the first time, and he asked to see the chef after he ate his meal. And she came out, and he was like, oh my God, this meal was amazing. And he asked her, did you study in Paris? Because of how great her souffle was.
Really?
And she goes, no, I've never even been out of the States. She doesn't even graduate from high school.
Jeez.
She doesn't even have, she has no quote unquote formal training. Mm-hmm. But she made her mark, and they had just an incredibly successful run in this restaurant. It was the talk of Hollywood, of the elite, of everyone. Now that became a problem with her husband.
Really?
Yes.
Was homie jealous or what?
He was a communist, and he felt that the restaurant was too bougie and that it was catering to capitalists.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
And so not at all of his goal in his life.
And I think he felt also hers, if her whole idea was give and give back, then what is she doing, catering only to the elites in the world?
Yeah. Probably seeing the fame rising and money coming in, but nothing maybe possibly going back out.
Well, and what she was taught, he had said, you should be making food for ordinary people. No ordinary person off the street could just walk in there and eat that food. Mm-hmm. They had to be wealthy.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was one of the reasons why she stepped back from the restaurant, but she did. She stepped back from the restaurant. She remained a partner, but her and her husband went up to New Jersey in 1954 and started a pheasant farm.
Okay. That's a right turn.
Yeah, it's a real weird, I don't know why, pheasant farm. But anyway.
I wonder if maybe he challenged her and just said, you need to get back to
your roots. So she started this pheasant farm, but for whatever reason, like a year later, one day she woke up and all of the fucking pheasants were dead. They'd had some mysterious illness and they all died.
Ugh.
Yeah.
That's not good. That sounds fishy to me.
Doesn't it?
That sounds like poison in the food.
Yeah, or like somebody did something to them. I don't know. Anyway, all of the pheasants died. So then she was like, I guess I'm not going to run a pheasant farm anymore. She opened up her own restaurant in Harlem that was supposed to be like a Southern food restaurant in Harlem. And Harlem was, of course, at the time a black neighborhood. Mm-hmm. But that too didn't last long. Again, it's still like not great time for money.
Yeah.
She landed a job, though, at the American Museum of Natural History. They had hired her to be a docent, and that means that she was a lecturer. She gave talks and stuff in the Hall of African Peoples. And on the side, she also taught cooking classes and worked as a private caterer.
This is not easy stuff.
No.
This is like stuff I don't even know how to describe it. As you work in this kind of industry that you don't just pick up and become a docent.
Right.
Like, for her to be able to pull that off and do it well and do it better than most people can do it, it's just shocking.
And I think like the fact that she was hired to be a docent at the Museum of Natural History without even so much as a high school degree shows how much, like, when you see her in a picture or on film, you just know. You just look at her and you're like, nope, that person knows exactly what they're doing. And they're so, like, you could just tell, like, honestly, she looks like a queen. Like, if there was like a cartoon drawing of what a queen looks like, it is her. And I think that she, like a lot of people described her as regal, as commanding, even though she was actually very soft-spoken. Like people would often have to like lean in to hear her talk. She just commanded attention. She was just that kind of presence in a room.
That kind of human.
So at this time, there's an editor at, I don't even know how to say this dumb publishing house's name. I've never known. I've always just read it on...
any worse than my German, so.
I've always read it on paper and never heard anybody say it, so I'm not sure if it's Knopf or Knopf. You know, the one that's...
Knopf.
Knopf. As a writer, I should probably fucking know this, but like literally I've never heard anybody say it out loud. So we'll just say that it's Knopf. So there's an editor there. Her name is Judith Jones, and she had... been the one to usher in the Diary of Anne Frank.
Wow.
And the Mastering the Art of French Cooking by Julia Child.
Huh.
And so she was looking for a new star.
That book was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big fucking deal.
Mm-hmm.
She was looking for a new star, somebody who could put together an American cookbook. She wanted some American cooking. Now, I'm going to do a little pause button and tell you about some things I learned that I didn't know about before.
Okay.
So really popular from, I don't know, somewhere in the early 1900s, maybe 1920s, till like, I don't know, the fucking 80s? It was really popular and common for white women socialites to publish cookbooks of their black workers' recipes.
What? Oh. What? Would they acknowledge that they weren't their recipes, or would they just be like, this is my workers' recipes? Or would they say that they were theirs?
So I think both. I don't know about other, like, I know there's one that was like, I can't even remember the woman's name, but it was like Emma or something like that. And it was like Miss Emma's recipes, right?
So it's like
this black woman's name, Miss Emma's recipes. And then it would be like, you know, Jane, Jane Smith at the bottom would be the person who got the fucking money.
That's gross.
Oh, and sometimes they would have this really racist, like, pidgin English that they would write in the book to pretend to be quote unquote black.
Oh my god.
Oh, it was real bad. Okay, so unpause. This comes into play here because a socialite named Evangeline Peterson wanted to publish a book of recipes of her amazing caterer.
No.
Who do you think that caterer was?
Oh, it's Our Lady, isn't it?
It's Miss Edna Lewis. And so she wanted to put together a recipe book of Miss Edna Lewis's book of her recipes. And so
Did Miss Edna say no?
So the editor at Knopf was like, I want to meet Edna Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
This person you said makes these recipes. So she meets with Miss Lewis and she was like, I love her.
Yeah.
So, the editor loved Edna Lewis. The socialite wanted to make this cookbook. Edna Lewis had just broken her leg. Some people said leg, some people said ankle. I'm not really sure. Anyway, she couldn't work.
Yeah.
So she was like, fine, I'm bored. I got nothing to do. I can't cook because I can't be on my feet.
Yeah.
So I'll work with this white lady on this book. So she does. She works with Evangeline Peterson and she writes, this recipe book with her. And it gets published as the Edna Lewis Cookbook in 1972. And it says Evangeline Peterson on it as well. It was published in 1972. Edna Lewis is at this point 56 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And Judith Jones, the editor, was like, she hated the book. She thought it was boring. And she was like, this is not the book I want. And it didn't really sell very well.
Yeah.
Because it was like, what? There were probably 1,000 of those out on the market.
Yeah.
So Judith Jones approached Edna Lewis and said, why don't we make your book? What do you want to write about?
But if she was collaborating with this other woman, it's probably peppered with this other woman's style and how she wanted to present it and not truly what she wanted to present just on her own.
It was totally not at all what Edna Lewis would have made. And in fact, I've looked at both of them online and it's completely different. So this book, what happened was Judith Jones sat down with Edna Lewis and just started asking her questions about her upbringing, about food, about growing things. And as they talked, Judith would say, that's what needs to be in your book. So they started having these sessions, and Edna Lewis would bring along a little yellow legal pad, and Judith Jones would ask her a question. She would write the question down, and then she would start talking, and she'd write down little notes about the things they talked about. And then she would go home that night, and she would write it. So she would write these passages for the book. And it was incredible. It is truly, truly, truly beautiful. She would tell these stories about growing up in Freetown, harvesting and fishing and hog killing. She could make hog killing sound romantic.
And it is not. I've seen a pig be slaughtered. Not fun.
So after she got her whole draft written, which was all handwritten on legal pads, her 12-year-old niece, her name is Nina Williams, she typed the manuscript once it had been written.
Oh, that's cool.
The Taste of Country Cooking was published in 1976 and is still considered in 2021 to be one of the best American cookbooks of all time.
Wow.
The book was one of the very first to combine memoir with recipes, also cooking seasonally and nose to tail.
Which is like totally a style now.
And farm to table. It was literally everything we are like doing in food right now.
Yeah.
So this is what Maria C. Hunt, who is a writer, who just literally in December of 2020, for the very first time had read Edna Lewis's Taste of Country Cooking and was like floored by it. So this is what she had to say about reading Edna Lewis's cookbook 20 years later or 40 years later. From the first pages of The Taste of Country Cooking, Lewis transports readers with her memories of Freeport, Virginia, the idyllic black town where she grew up, and the local foods the community planted, harvested, and enjoyed in season. There are stories of crisp shad roe and wild asparagus in spring, summer suppers of Virginia ham with red gravy and ripe melon with salt and pepper, and cool weather delights like newly dug sweet potatoes, cold roasted pheasant, and country fried apples.
Ooh.
The book was honestly a fucking revelation. It was an embracement of Southern food that no one had done yet. Especially because at this time, being Southern and cooking Southern food was sort of looked down upon, right? If you wanted to be a professional chef, you wanted to cook French food.
Yeah.
Not Southern food. And that was a big deal. And so she was writing a Southern cookbook, and it was traditional, slow Southern food. The kind where you only cook what's in season because that's what's available to you.
And there's that care and the patience and almost a tenderness to it, not a rushed. I understand why people wanted to get it fast and easy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And literally when this is being published, this is like the height of microwave TV dinners, So she's advocating for something that was completely different. And the cookbook is divided by seasons. It starts in spring and it ends in winter. And there are, I would not say like a ton of recipes per season. And they're all like themed. And it's really neat. It's just so cool. I have it on order.
No, yay!
I'm so excited about it. I read as much as I could online and I was like, buy, purchase.
I'm just thinking of because I know so many cooks here in town, and I have one certain person I'm like, he would love this book.
Oh, I'm going to read you an excerpt from it just to hammer home how fucking good this book is. So at the beginning of every section, like I said, it's separated by season. She would do an introduction to that section on every one of them to sort of talk about what the season was. What did they eat? What did they catch? What did they harvest? And so this is the spring section. This is
what a wonderful documentation too of Southern life.
This is just a brief part of the introduction, and I did kind of skip around, and so there's stuff that I skipped over in this, but I think that this sounds great. It's a little long, but I think it's worth it. I will never forget spring mornings in Virginia. A warm morning and a red sun rising behind a thick fog gave the image of a pale pink veil supported by a gentle breeze that blew out our thin marquisette curtains out into the room, leaving them to fall lazily back. A stream filled from the melted snows of winter would flow quietly by us, gurgling softly and gently pulling the leaf of a fern that hung lazily from the side of its bank. After moments of complete exhilaration, we would return joyfully to the house for breakfast. Floating out to greet us was the aroma of coffee cooking and meat frying, mingled with the smell of oak wood burning in the cook stove. Breakfast was about the best part of the day. There was an almost mysterious feeling about passing through the night and awakening to a new day. Shad would always be served for breakfast, soaked in salt water for an hour or so, rolled in seasoned cornmeal and fried carefully in home-rendered lard with a slice of smoked shoulder for added flavor. There were crispy fried white potatoes, fried onions, batter bread, any food left over from supper, blackberry jelly, delicious hot coffee, and cocoa for the children. And perhaps, if a neighbor dropped in, dandelion wine was added. With the morning feeding of the animals out of the way, breakfast was enjoyable and leisurely.
That sounds so ideal.
It's like a whole scene.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't it just transport you?
Yes.
So I mentioned that I truly believe her to be the creator of what I think is the modern farm-to-table movement. And I think that passage really illustrates that. But I'm going to really hammer it home again because I'm going to share a clip from that documentary I spoke of earlier where she's talking about chickens and how you get a frying chicken.
Ooh.
In Freetown, fried chicken was a very special dish. Frying chickens were grown only once a year. In late spring through early summer, they were hand-raised and specially fed. This made the most delicious flavored chicken. We fried them in sweet, home-rendered lard, churned butter, and a slice of smoked ham for added flavor.
I didn't know frying chickens were a season.
I didn't either. I didn't know that there were special chickens that were only for frying.
Yeah.
I didn't know that they should be fried in a specific season. Mm-hmm. I didn't know any of that.
I didn't know that either. We take fried chicken for year-round accessibility.
So I think what is most remarkable about The Taste of Country Cooking and Edna Lewis in general is that in this book that is so transcendent, she is writing about a time and existing herself in a time and place in which violent, virulent racism reigned. We're talking the KKK. We're talking her on a fucking Sunday would be walking out to a lynch mob. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, she has literally been seeing bodies hanging from trees. And instead of having that imbue her work, she is talking about the idyllic, moments where you could take pleasure in your life. And there's something like fucking revolutionary about that and rebellious to be like, I'm not even going to fucking acknowledge the shit you put me through. I'm going to talk about how we made our own community and our own food and we didn't need you.
Yeah. That's brilliant.
So there's actually a great writer named Francis Lamb who wrote a big long piece about Edna Lewis in the New York Times. And this is what he said about her ability to do this. If someone handed you a book about a settlement of freed slaves trying to live off the land, what would you expect? A story of struggle, at least. Privation and desperation, probably. But in Lewis's telling, it is a story of peace and celebration, of receiving gifts of the earth and hard work. It is a story of refinement, not in the fine china sense, but in the sense of being meticulous and careful about the way the people of Freetown raised and grew and trapped and foraged and prepared their food, because their lives were worth that. That pleasure was due them.
That's awesome. I think maybe this is also why she didn't touch on her first move to Washington, D.C., because that was probably hard. That was probably a struggle. That was probably a difficult transition for her and a shocking, change in her life. But to not even go towards the good things in life and where her heart is and where her passion is. I think, and this is in my opinion, people like to hear about a Black person's struggle.
Yeah.
Because look at, they had nothing and then they came up from this and how inspiring it makes me feel.
Yeah.
It makes me feel good.
Inspiration porn.
Yeah. And she's not pushing play on that button.
She's not giving that satisfaction.
Yeah.
And actually, as a side note, I didn't put this in my notes, but it's been hanging on in my mind, and so I'm going to mention it. So when they were putting the book together, that's Judith Jones, by the way, on the screen. She, there's in the winter section, there's a whole Christmas Eve dinner, Christmas breakfast. And in the fall section, there's no Thanksgiving. And she said, there isn't a Thanksgiving here. And very quietly, Edna Lewis says, we didn't do Thanksgiving. We did Emancipation Day.
Ooh.
And it was in September. And so that's what's in the book, is this Emancipation Day dinner and what it meant and what they ate. And there is no mention of Thanksgiving. And you get to read between the lines about why that is.
That is really neat.
I know. And again, it's 1972 or whatever, 1976. And I also appreciate it. And I know we shouldn't clap white people on the back for basic human decency. But I think the editor allowing her to I could see a different kind of editor being like, no, you need to throw that in there even if it's not part of your culture. But that's not what Judith wanted. Judith wanted the book that would be Edna Lewis. Mm-hmm. And if that's not how they did things, then that's not how they did things.
Yeah.
And I just appreciated that she didn't push back and make it into something that wouldn't be authentic.
Oh, there you go. It is also too, I know that being American, I've been raised with a certain check mark of holidays and what is a big deal to us and to other Americans that is not necessarily their truth. And so it's really nice to hear about other things, because then it shows me that I'm fucking limited myself.
I love the idea that this entire community never celebrated Thanksgiving. Their Thanksgiving dinner was Emancipation Day, and it was in September. Great. Fantastic. I love it. Let's all do that. So after she did this book, which again was a huge success, Miss Lewis went back to cooking professionally. She did some stints in restaurants in North Carolina, and she also was the head chef at the revival of a very famous New York City restaurant called Gage and Tollner, which was in Brooklyn. But it didn't really last very long. None of those really lasted long. And by this time, her husband had died, and Edna Lewis was well into her 60s.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
For some reason, I thought they would have split up.
Yeah, he doesn't make a lot of appearances in her biography, and I'm okay with
I
that.
wonder if they just had a quiet existence together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Miss Lewis saw it as her mission, though, to preserve Southern food. What she was seeing when she actually very vocally criticized what she called soul food restaurants in New York, which is why I brought it up in the first place, is that Edna Lewis's point of view was that none of this was Southern food. It wasn't soul food. It was garbage. She thought a lot of it was garbage. And that's why she felt it was important to her legacy, to her mission, to preserve what she considered to be real Southern food. And she thought that Southern food was becoming extinct. So she founded the Society for the Revival and Preservation of Southern Food. And she just became kind of the first lady of Southern food, not only from this cookbook that she had created, which had caused quite a ripple in the food world, but also because of the society. And that's basically what she spent the rest of her life doing, was going to food festivals, cooking Southern food, talking about Southern food. And in 1990, she was at a food festival, a Southern food festival, when she met Scott Peacock. And Scott Peacock was at the time the executive chef at the governor's mansion in Georgia. And he was young. I think he was in his 20s. He was white. He was gay. He was a professionally trained chef. But she was like, he was like, hey, can I help you cook anything? And he just like took over and started rolling out some dough. And she was like, my God, my food is going to taste like garbage. You're all going to think this was made by me. And then it came out and it was perfect. And she was like, oh, this boy can cook. I can't believe it. And from then on, they were basically inseparable. He had actually mentioned to her that he wanted to travel to Tuscany to learn to cook Italian cuisine. And she looked at him and she said, you need to learn you need to learn about your own food before you go studying someone else's.
Interesting.
And he said, then teach me. And that's what she did. And the two of them became a very unlikely pair. They went everywhere together. They were called the odd couple of Southern cooking. They were very well known.
Yeah.
Like, they would show up to all these food festivals and big foodie events, and they were always together. It's just this weird situation. Eventually, Judith Jones had been working with Edna Lewis on a cookbook and it just wasn't really going anywhere. And she said, why don't you work with Scott on it? And that's what they did. It took them, I think, 7 or 8 years perfecting recipes together in her kitchen. And they published The Gift of Southern Cooking, which received a James Beard nomination. As Miss Lewis got older, he became more than a friend, not in a romantic or sexual way, but more as an everything way, a companion way. He eventually moved in with her in 1999.
Which those relationships exist.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He moved in with her in 1999 as her health was failing and she was having a harder time getting around. And actually, at some point in this later adult life, she had also sort of adopted a young man. He was a college student who had come from Eritrea, and she had adopted him and became his mother.
Wow.
And he now has a PhD and works at the University of Michigan. His name is Afewerki Paulos. So her closest relationship, though, was to Scott Peacock. And I'm not going to really go into the family stuff simply because it seems like it was messy and I don't really know what was going on. Mm-hmm. What I know from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is that at some point when her health was going downhill and Scott was taking care of her full time, he had done some kind of like a GoFundMe, but before the internet.
Yeah.
Like a mutual aid situation, and had asked for some help, and her family was pissed and was like, if you can't afford to take care of her, then she needs to move in with us. And she wanted to stay in her home and she wanted him to stay there. And there was a falling out of some
Things
kind.
get messy at the end of people's lives like that.
Especially important people.
Yeah.
You know? So Scott Peacock moved in with her in 1999, and he took care of her until the day she died on February 13th, 2006, exactly 2 months shy of her 90th birthday. The year after her death, Scott Peacock won the James Beard Award for Best Chef of the Southeast.
Oh, whoa.
A feat he would not have managed without Edna Lewis steering him back to his roots of Southern food. In her lifetime, she received numerous awards and accolades, including the first James Beard Living Legend Award in 1995. She was named a Grande Dame in 1999 by La Dame d'Escoffier, an international organization of female culinary professionals. She also won the very first Lifetime Achievement Award from the Southern Foodways Alliance in 1999. And in 2014, she was honored with her own U.S. postal stamp, which I didn't even know about. She published 4 cookbooks in all, and her classic, The Taste of Country Cooking, saw a resurgence in 2017 after Top Chef did an entire episode in homage to her.
That's cool.
Edna Lewis was an elegant and mighty force, commanding a room with her presence despite her soft-spokenness. Her passion for Southern cooking, for simple, fresh ingredients and cooking seasonally, was the overlooked beginning of some of our most important movements in cooking and in food today. She was a trailblazer and should be remembered.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Isn't she great?
And she's great, yeah. And I love the preserving that she did of her home, her life, the people around her. It just, stuff like that has such a tenderness and a soul to it. No pun intended. Which I really admire, because not everybody can translate that. It's really hard to do that. Like, I don't even know this lady. And I could just feel like the love, because I feel like everybody has that connection to food. Especially this kind of food, which has been so underrated for so long, but now has been, the mantle for so many people. And it's people like her are the ones that had it in their hand.
I truly believe personally, and I know I'm a little biased because I grew up eating it, but I think that Southern food is the only true American food. It is the only food that came from here originally. Like, it's the only food we have that is just ours. It is not a food that you can replicate on any other place.
Yeah.
But you can have, the California food is as close as you might get. It's new American, but it has so many like Mexican elements to it that are not quote unquote,
American.
US American, you
yeah.
know? So this is it. This is all we got. It's Southern food should be hailed, in my opinion, as the highest form of our cuisine. Especially when we're talking about the kind of stuff that she did, that seasonal, fresh, healthy,
sustainable.
Really great food that's cooked with care. Like in her book, they stone ground cornmeal.
Yikes.
To make that fish.
Whoa.
That they caught. Like, it's incredible. And she talks about in her book the technique of stone ground cornmeal having been something that they learned from the local tribes. That was, again, uniquely American, like that you cannot get somewhere else. So I really admire Edna Lewis. I've loved her for years. So glad that she's getting the recognition that she's always deserved.
Yeah.
But and Alice Waters, who I told you is kind of credited with the farm to table movement and organic movement. She wrote the foreword to the 30th anniversary edition of the book. And she credits Edna Lewis as being, ahead of her time. And I wish that wasn't even the way we talked about it. She was of her time. She was already the leader. You just didn't choose to follow till later, until it was a white lady saying it.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's important to say that I think Edna Lewis is the one who really did this and should be credited as such. That's what I have to say. So I'm going to share my sources with y'all. I highly recommend watching that documentary. It's called Fried Chicken and Sweet Potato Pie. It's by Bailey Barash, B. Barash Productions. It's on YouTube on the Library of Virginia. There's a great profile by Frances Lamb at the New York Times called Edna Lewis and the Black Roots of American Cooking. A Passion for Food, Edna Lewis, the First Lady of Southern Cooking Dies by Wendell Brock for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Her obit in the New York Times by Eric Asimov and Kim Severson. The Edna Lewis Foundation, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. And the Black woman I talked about who used the pandemic to get in touch with Edna Lewis's cooking techniques. I highly recommend reading her article, We Need to Thank Edna Lewis for Teaching Us the Joys of Eating Seasonally by Maria C. Hunt for thekitchen.com without an E. So it's THEKITCHN.com. So the Edna Lewis Foundation is a foundation that has been created in her name. And remember her niece who typed up her manuscript?
Yeah.
She's one of the people who runs the foundation.
Wow.
And she, the foundation specifically gives funding to Black people who are wanting to get into some kind of project in food, agriculture, restaurant type stuff. It's not seed money to start a restaurant. That's their one thing they wouldn't do, but it's scholarship. So it'll help you pay for housing or whatever while you do a project. And it's just really neat shit. Really fucking cool shit.
That is really neat.
And that is Edna Lewis.
Oh, I loved it. I loved it so much.
Well, I hope we get a chance to actually make her fried chicken. I have a little idea in my mind of having Lucas hook us up with some sound and some good camera setup, and
oh, that would be so fun.
We could make her fried chicken recipe, which is it's not deep fried, it's pan fried, and it's real neat. The process
pan fried's the way to go, by the way.
And it's not really breaded the way we consider a lot of fried chicken now. It's very light breading. It's not greasy. It's so neat. I'm very excited to try it.
Alrighty.
Well, everybody, thank you for listening.
Yeah, we want to thank Lucas, our editor, as well, for sticking with us through 2020. And now we're starting 2021.
Before we completely close out today's episode, I do have an ask. Some of you may have seen this on our social media. I lost my wedding rings in the Dallas airport in DFW on December 28th. It's very upsetting to me. The rings mean a lot to me. And I would love to get them back. If you are in the Dallas area, check out our social media and then see if you are near a pawn shop. Check in, see if it's there. I don't know. I'll pay you. I just want them back.
Yeah.
I'm desperate for them to get back to me. So if you could do that, I'd really appreciate it. We also have some things in store for 2021 in terms of merchandise, so keep checking back for that. You can also support us on Patreon, which we'd really appreciate. So if you could go onto Patreon and do that, that'd be awesome.
That'd be great. Well, thank you so much for that story. That was awesome.
We went on a whole ass journey today.
We did.
We started with coming out. We did Christmas. We did food. It's
food,
great.
Which is one of our favorite things.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Jennifer Finch, for our theme music. And we'll see you all next time.
All right. Till next time.